Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 332. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the afternoon of Sunday, October the 1st, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. Sunday, October the 1st. When I'm finished with the podcast, I'm going to take a dip in the pool like I did yesterday, like I did Friday. I know normally our highs should be in the 70s and the lows should be in the 50s, but we've had highs in the 80s. In fact, I think it hit 91 here yesterday, lows in the 60s. So my pool yesterday was 83 degrees, okay, at its peak. And the heater's not on, by the way, okay. 83 is perfect for a pool for me. If the sun's shining, there's not a lot of wind. The trophy wife likes it 84, but you know what? 83 is close enough to 84, and we're not turning on the heater. Global warming is a real thing, and I know a lot of people don't like global warming because of what it's doing. But from a very selfish perspective, friends, if global warming means I can swim in the backyard into October, I guess I'm going to look at the silver lining of that dark cloud. And if you're honest, I don't know that you can blame me. But we're not going to talk about swimming in October. That's not the topic of today's essay. Today's essay is why conspiracy theories have legs. And this is about a story I've talked about many times before. And it has to do with different things that are going on and things the government has done in the past. And usually the really bad things the government does, they deny until everybody who did it is dead. And then they raise their hand and admit it. And many years ago in St. Louis, they dumped a bunch of zinc, cadmium, sulfide all over North St. Louis in the 50s and 60s, used blowers from the tops of buildings, including from the Pruitt-Igo housing project, just to see what would happen. And because it was in the poor parts of the city, the poor people aren't going to be able to complain. Well, that was a thing, and we're going to talk about it again, mainly because it's become a thing again. And I did not get this off of Alex Jones' website. I did not get this off of some weird conspiracy theorist website. This came from a local Fox 2 station, okay, our local television station, just reminding everybody, look, this happened. It was a thing. And be careful when somebody throws a conspiracy theory at you and you tell them, you know what, that's baloney. It couldn't happen. Often that's the case, but not always. But before we get into the crux of the essay, Saturday night, the trophy wife and I, for the first time in quite some time, went to see some of the old aging rockers that we like to see before they die. And we saw Ringo Starr and his all-star band for the second time. So you think to yourself, well, why do you want to see him for the second time? Well, because the all-star band was different. It had some of the same people as the last time we saw them. It still had Ringo Starr, of course. It had Steve Lukather from Toto, but the rest of the band was different. This time they had Edgar Winter, that Edgar Winter, Frankenstein, and Free Ride. Yeah, Free Ride. Not Free Bird. Free Ride. Colin Hay from Men at Work. Hamish Stewart from the Average White Band. Orrin Ham from Toto. And who was the other guy? There was a third one. Who the heck was it? Greg Bissonette. Yeah, he was also from, I think he played with Toto. He played with David Lee Roth, the ELO, Joe Santorini. He's played with a lot of people. He was one of the guys from Spinal Tap, too. All these guys have been around forever. And the thing about this band, Ringo Starr and his all-star band, they have some younger guys around to do the heavy lifting. Greg Bissonette does the majority of the drum playing because he's only 64. And Warren Ham, he did most of the keyboard playing and the saxophone playing because he's only 66. Okay. I mean, some of these guys, Ringo Starr is in his 80s. Edgar Winter is in his late 70s. Colin Hay is in his 70s. Steve Lukather is almost 70. I mean, these guys are old. Hamish Stewart is in his 70s. They got to have the young guys to do the heavy lifting. And again, the young guys are in their 60s. But it was really fun. It was basically they played all the hits of Ringo Starr and some Beatles, mainly Ringo Starr. Toto hits, Average White Band hits, of course, Edgar Winter's hits, the two big ones he had. They played a couple other songs. One of the funniest parts of the concert, though, is when Steve Lukather, the main guitarist for the band, and he was the main guitarist for Toto, he started talking about, hey, thanks for coming tonight. Thanks for listening to our old songs, the old classics. We've played a lot of songs that you've all been very familiar with. But the band and I have been getting together with a new album, and we've been practicing this new album that's coming up, and we wanted to go ahead and play one of the selections from this new album, this all new music. It's got about a 20-minute jazz solo in the middle of it. I think you're going to enjoy it. And the whole crowd got quiet. Like, it wasn't like they were saying, oh boy, let's listen to this. They're thinking, 20 minutes of new music? We didn't pay to see these guys do the new music. And then Lukather says, nah, I'm just kidding. We're just going to play another song that you've heard. Everybody cheered. They played another song everybody's heard of, and life was good. The reason I mention that is because I have said this more than once, and I don't think anybody out there would deny that this would happen. If they found some way to reanimate and bring John Lennon and George Harrison back from the dead and put the Beatles back on stage, all four of them, the boys from Liverpool, to play again in front of a live crowd. Halfway through the band, when somebody said, you know what? We've been working on some new songs, so we're going to play a few cuts from our upcoming album. I guarantee half the crowd would go to the bathroom at that time. Because when it comes to the old guys, nobody wants to hear your new stuff. They paid to hear the stuff that you've played once upon a time. They want to hear the old man play it one more time. And they are old, but they were all very good. But here's the other thing about a band. When you see these old guys, we saw them at the Fox. The Fox is a good venue for that. Perfect acoustics, comfortable seats, iconic building, beautiful building. Those of you that have been know what I'm talking about. But we got out, and as I'm walking out, they had a bar that was set up. And of course, the concert was over, so the bar was closed. And they said, the bar will be open during the concert. The concert time will be 8 o'clock until 10:10. I looked at my phone to see what the time was. It was 10:12. And yeah, we were about 2 minutes away from our seats. So in other words, at 10:10, they said, that's it, show's over. There was no encore. They turned on the lights and they went home. So you got what you paid for. Nothing more, but certainly nothing less. And besides, Ringo Starr is 84, 85. He was up till 10:10 at night, and he had a concert to play the next day in Nashville. So he wasn't going to stay up. I guarantee he was not up partying all night long with a bunch of groupies. He was in bed by 10:15. But it was a good concert. If you get a chance to see them and any of the old rockers, I would highly recommend it. Don't get stupid with the money. We had a gift card to the Fox, which defrayed some of the cost, to be honest, but because these are not cheap tickets usually when you see these old guys, because these old guys know people want to see them one last time. And they're not putting out any new music. They're just playing the venues. But if you get a chance to see them, especially if it's a group that you really like growing up, see them before they've passed their prime, or at least see them while they can still put on a decent show. You can go down that nostalgic path and have a good time. And see them before they have to use a walker. My recommendation. Another story I wanted to talk about again before we go into the conspiracy theory about how the government tried to poison half of St. Louis. Changes in the airline industry. And why are the airlines, question, why are the airlines in business? Answer, to make money, okay? And when you get to be a company as big as the airline, just like any other big company, Procter & Gamble, sure, they make soap and they make diapers and they make other stuff like that. But Procter & Gamble also has a legal department that expects to turn a profit. And if you try to infringe on any of Procter & Gamble's patents, friend, they will sue you with a vengeance. I knew one company that it was a feminine care product. And those of you that are familiar with feminine care products, on the sides of some of them, they have what are called wings. Well, wings are a patented Procter & Gamble thing. I don't know if that patent has run out, but once upon a time it had not. And I knew a guy who made a private label feminine care product with wings. Procter & Gamble found out about it and sued him. And he couldn't do much about it because he was a small company and Procter & Gamble is huge. So Procter & Gamble sued him and they won. But they didn't ask for money. They just asked for a percentage, a dollar amount for every product that they sold. Since they had contracts, they had two choices. They could pay the check or tell the customer I can't fulfill the contract. So they did. And for every product that customer built and sent to his customer, he made X. Procter & Gamble made more than that. So Procter & Gamble made more on every product that this company sold than the company that built it. So what I'm getting at is big companies make money in more ways than you would think. The airlines are no different. Delta Airlines this week came out with a change in their Sky Club awards. That's their frequent flyer thing. And they're thinking that others are going to go the same way. And I say that because Southwest Airlines recently, just this week, they had what they called a half-off sale. And basically most places, at least in the continental United States, not Mexico, not Puerto Rico, not Hawaii, but many other places, they really had half-price tickets, okay? I booked a trip to, where did I book this trip to? Was it Milwaukee? I think for like $120 round trip, $140 round trip. It was stupid cheap. It was great. But you're thinking oil is what? It's over $90 a barrel. How can they do this? Well, that's what I'm going to talk to you about Delta Airlines, and how the others are going to follow through with this as well. In fact, Delta Airlines recently changed its frequent flyer program and the airport lounge rules. And some people are happy about this because they already spend enough Delta flights or have enough credit cards. They get enough points to keep their cherished status. And if less people have status, if less people can get into the to the first class seats or the lounges, that means they have a better chance of getting in, and it's going to be less crowded. So they like it. The others are excited because Delta's eliminating or capping lounge access to credit card holders, perhaps finally cutting down to the Sky Club crowds. Because what was happening is, okay, I have a Sky Club card. I fly a lot on Delta. I went to the Sky Club because I'm flying to Dubai, okay? I had to get there 4 hours early, so I got 2 hours before my flight takes off. So I go to the Sky Club. Sorry, sir, it's full. Yeah, but I'm super duper double deluxe status. Sorry, it's still full. Okay? Well, they're not letting in some of the great unwashed. They're only letting in the ones who spent a lot of money with them, which means the big spenders get in, and the great unwashed, not so much. So, in fact, you may be thinking to yourself, okay, Strong, when you said spend a lot of money, what you really meant was a lot of miles, flight miles, right? No. It's exactly what I meant. It doesn't have to do with miles anymore. It's on how much money you spend with them. In fact, Southwest has been that way for quite some time. Doesn't matter how many miles you fly. It matters how much the flight costs. Okay. So you go by dollars spent, not by miles flown. And not only by dollars spent via the flight, but dollars spent via your tagged credit card. Now, beginning next year, for 2025 travel, Delta will have just one metric for earning status, and that's money. Money spent on Delta tickets, vacation packages, hotels, rental cars booked through Delta, and spending on Delta's SkyMile credit card. You think to yourself, wait, the credit card, okay, fine. I've got a Hilton Honors credit card. I love it because I never pay for a hotel when I go on my own because I get the Hilton Honors. I've got 1.7 million Hilton Honors points. I'm not going to be buying a hotel for quite some time. But how much do you think Delta actually makes on their American Express card? The spending, check this out. The spending on Delta's American Express card is staggering. They spend nearly 1% of the entire United States gross national product. That's how much Delta makes on their credit card. That's according to Chief Executive Ken Bastian. He said this a couple months ago. The airline hopes these changes will generate an even larger gusher of cash. How much money did they make last year? Delta will collect $7 billion in revenue from American Express this year alone on the sale of miles, ancillary services, brand fees, etc. Its long-term goal is $10 billion. They want to make $10 billion a year off the credit card. Now that's nearly equal to the amount that the airline generated from flying passengers in 2022. In other words, the amount they make off the Delta credit card is approaching how much they make with flying people on their airplanes. Now, the number of flights or miles flown, that's a key component of Delta's frequent flyer program today. That's not going to count. They don't care how many miles you fly. They will care how much you spent on the ticket and how much you spend on the credit card. Because flights will help you do this if they cost enough. In fact, American Airlines already made the switch. So as everything else, folks, it's all about the money. Delta makes almost as much on their American Express card with Delta on the front of it than they do with the airline flying part of the business. And that's got to be a whole lot easier, wouldn't you think? Doesn't matter about weather. It doesn't matter about how much fuel costs. It doesn't matter about an airline strike. It just matters how many times you swipe that card. Which is why smaller businesses a lot of times say, okay, you can use your credit card, but it costs you extra. I don't like that one bit, but I certainly understand why they do it. Because if Delta made $7 billion on that credit card, you know American Express made something too. There's no such thing as a free lunch, but you know what? If you're going to go ahead and make the money where you can. And I get it. I understand why they want to do this because that's how you make money. Business is all about making money. And it's not all about the core business. The core business needs to be what you're all about. But every other business, the bigger they get, the more they diversify. Okay. Before we get into the big conspiracy theory thing, I think conspiracy theories have gotten bigger. In fact, they probably started with the Kennedy assassination. And I think it's because people's trust in government continues to go by the wayside. Now, there's a reason for that. And I think the number one reason for that, okay, you can talk about social media. You can talk about 18,000 different news services. You can talk about millions of podcasts, including my Dopey podcast. I mean, everybody has an opinion. Everybody talks. People listen to stuff on a regular basis and they form their own opinions. Okay. I get that. But politicians themselves have just become asses. And you've always had politicians that you don't like. I mean, way back when Nixon and Humphrey ran against each other, I remember that was the first time in my life I remember people either loved Nixon and hated Humphrey, or loved Humphrey and hated Nixon. There was no middle ground, okay? Now, perhaps things were always that way. But when you looked at the politics of Humphrey versus Nixon, they weren't a ton different. I mean, they were, but basically they both supported the Vietnam War. They both supported this and that. Probably 50 to 70% they were in lockstep with. They agreed. The other 30%, not so much. And the 30% was what made them different, what made you go here or there. Were you pro-business or were you pro-union? Were you pro-civil rights today or pro-civil rights? Let's ease it in. What were some of the other issues? Education. How much education should the federal government have versus the local government? Those were all issues, okay? Union, not union. That was the big thing in St. Louis. Basically, Democrats and Republicans were the same. It's just that the Democrats were pro-union. Republicans, not so much. Other than that, they were a whole lot the same, okay? Not anymore. And the politicians nowadays attack people on a personal basis, okay? It used to be, my opponent thinks the union should have this and this and that. Why, I think the American people should have this and this and that, okay? And of course they exaggerate, but that's politics. And everybody took everything a politician with a grain of salt. It's difficult for me anymore to say, I mean, I've never said I'm a Republican or a Democrat, but I've usually leaned towards the way that the Republican Party believed more than the Democratic Party. Okay, that's just the way I've been. I voted for both. I don't think I've ever in an election just pulled the GOP lever. I've always voted for some of the Democrats or some of the independents. But anymore, I mean, the Republican Party has just turned into the Three Stooges or the Thousand Stooges. The things that they say, the people they put out there. I mean, you just have to scratch your head and wonder. Donald Trump recently, yesterday or today, that Nikki Haley is gathering points, closing the gap between her and Trump. How do you know that for sure? Oh, because Trump called her a bird brain. Okay. Now, you know what? When Nikki Haley worked for me as the UN secretary, she did this, and that, and I disagree with that. No, you got to call her a bird brain. Okay, everybody who ever worked for Donald Trump and didn't agree with everything he said is stupid, is a moron, is a bird brain, okay? It's the name calling. It's the stupidity of the way people act as to why people say, well, this person said something, this person's a dope. In the upcoming election, we're probably going to have Donald Trump and Joe Biden. I mean, one doesn't know it's Tuesday, and the other one is such an ass that, in fact, he may be trying to govern from federal prison, okay? But that's okay. We've always got the libertarians, right? Which is who I voted for in the last two elections, by the way. Not because I like the libertarians, but I could not even hold my nose and pull the lever for either of the Democrats or Republicans. So I voted, call it a protest vote. Who's the libertarian candidate going to be this time? Robert Kennedy Jr., the guy who thinks all vaccines give you autism. The guy who thinks we should outlaw the internal combustion engine. We should do it all off of electricity. Oh, and by the way, electricity cannot be generated via nuclear or coal or gas or oil or hydroelectric or wind, only solar. That can't happen. So what do we get 20% of our electricity from solar? What would happen if all of a sudden you had to run everything on electricity and you could only get electricity from solar power? Friends, the Chinese would march on us and all we could do was surrender. That's all that would happen. So there is no viable candidate. If it's these three, we're screwed because you got Larry, Moe, and Curly. Okay? None of them are good. Now, maybe that won't be the candidate. I don't know. But it's for reasons like this that we have the conspiracy theories. Because if the president of the United States can do this, then obviously he could have done that, right? That's how a conspiracy theory works. And quite often they're actually for real. In fact, Dateline St. Louis, this is an AP story, but it appeared on the website of Fox 2 News. But it was off the Associated Press. And I've talked about this before. If you don't believe me, Google it, because it's a true story. It really happened. Ben Phillips, this is the guy they're talking about, he had childhood memories, including basketball games with friends and neighbors, gathering in the summer shade at their St. Louis housing project, Pruitt-Igo. He also remembers watching men in hazmat suits scurry to the rooftops of the high-rise buildings as a dense material poured into the air. I remember the mist, said Phillips. He's now 73. I remember what we thought was smoke rising out of the chimneys. Then there were these machines on top of the buildings that were spewing the mist. Now, as Congress considers payments to the victims of the Cold War era nuclear contamination in the St. Louis region, yeah, they're going to write them a check, unless they're all dead. But the people who were targeted for the secret government testing from that same time period, they believe they're due compensation too. Now, in the 50s and 60s, the Army used blowers on the tops of buildings and in the backs of station wagons to spray a potential carcinogen into the air surrounding a St. Louis housing project where most residents were black. The government contends that zinc, cadmium sulfide sprayed to simulate what would happen in a biological weapons attack was harmless. Now, Phillips and Chester Denis disagree. Those men grew up in the Pruitt-Igo housing complex, and they're now leading the charge, seeking compensation and further health studies that could determine whether the secretive testing contributed to various illnesses or premature deaths that some Pruitt-Igo residences later suffered. We were experimented on, said Phillips. That was the plan. And it wasn't an accident. Now, a new push comes as federal lawmakers are weighing compensation for people claiming harm from other government actions and inactions during the Cold War. In fact, an earlier Associated Press reported in July that government and companies responsible for nuclear bomb production and bomb waste storage sites in and near St. Louis were aware of the health risks, spills, and other problems, but they just ignored them. Many believe the nuclear waste was responsible for the death of loved ones and the ongoing health problems. Now, an AP report, part of a collaboration with the Missouri Independent newspaper and the nonprofit newsroom Muck Rock, examined documents obtained by outside researchers through the Freedom of Information Act. Republican Senator Josh Hawley introduced legislation soon after the news reports calling for expansion of an existing compensation program for exposure victims. The Senate endorsed the amendment. While the House has yet to vote, Democratic President Joe Biden said last month that he was prepared to help in terms of making sure that these folks are taken care of. Former residents of Pruitt-Igo say they should be taken care of too. Phillips and Denis, both 75, are co-founders of PHACTS, FACTS with a PH, which stands for Pruitt-Igo Historical Accounting, Compensation, and Truth Seeking. Their attorney, Elkin Kistner, said it would be appropriate and necessary for Hawley's proposal to be widened to include former Pruitt-Igo residences. The government released documents back in 1994 revealing the details about the spraying. And St. Louis wasn't alone in being subjected to secretive Cold War-era testing. Similar spraying occurred at nearly 36 other locations. Now, if you remember, those of you that grew up in the 60s, and you lost your baby teeth, give your tooth to science. Send your teeth to Washington University and they'll experiment on your teeth. They were looking for that. They were looking for nuclear. They were looking for the chemicals they sprayed just to see what they would do. So they sprayed these chemicals. Then they wanted you to give them their baby teeth to see how it affected you. That was a real deal. Okay? That was a real deal. Now, there were other types of secret testing. In a 2017 book, St. Louis sociologist Lisa Martino-Taylor cited documents obtained through a Freedom of Information Act request to detail how pregnant women in several cities were given doses of radioactive iron during prenatal visits to determine how much was absorbed into the blood of the mothers and the babies. The government also created radiation fields inside buildings, including a California school. The areas of testing in St. Louis were described in Army documents as a densely populated slum district. About 3/4 of the residents were black. They were living in so-called poverty, Dina said. That's why they did it. We have all been experimenting on those living in those conditions, living on the edge since I've known America. And of course, they could get away with it because they didn't tell anyone. And it's always the poor because the poor don't have a voice. It's not just black people, it's poor people, and a lot of poor people are black people. So consequently, yeah, it's a lot of black folks. Pruitt-Igo was built in the 50s with the promise of a new and better life for lower-income residents. Of course, it failed, and they demolished the whole housing complex back in the 70s. But despite the ultimate demise, Dinas and Phillips said that through their youth, Pruitt-Igo was a welcoming place. Yet over the years, both men cited countless premature deaths and unusual illnesses among relatives, friends that once lived in Pruitt-Igo. Phillips' mother died of cancer, and a sister suffered convulsions that puzzled her doctors, said Phillips. Phillips himself lost hearing in one ear due to a benign tumor. Dinas's brother battled health problems for years and died of heart failure. Both men wonder if the spraying was responsible. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, but you gotta wonder. In fact, a government study found that in a worst-case scenario, repeated exposures to zinc cadmium sulfide could cause kidney and bone toxicity and lung cancer. Yet the Army contends there was no evidence anyone in St. Louis was harmed. Did they ask? Did they test? A spokesperson for the Army said in a statement to the AP that health assessments performed by the Army concluded that exposure would not pose a health risk, and follow-up independent studies also found no cause for alarm. But then they never spray this stuff in the areas where the generals and colonels and majors live, do they? Phillips and Dean believe that the previous health studies were half-hearted. In addition to a new health study, they like to see soil tested to see if any of the radioactive material was part of the spraying. It's unclear if Hawley's bill might be expanded. Messages left with his office were not returned. Democratic U.S. Senator Cori Bush of St. Louis said in a statement that she and her staff are currently looking into an alternative pathway if the federal government can take to ensure that those impacted by the spraying of radioactive compounds and biochemicals in Pruitt-Igo are also addressed. Dinas and Phillips said that in addition to compensation and more detailed studies, they want an apology. But of course, they normally don't get that because an apology is an admission of guilt. This shouldn't go on, said Dinas. How are we supposed to be the leaders of the free world? And this is how we treat our people. And he's not wrong. And when stuff like this happens, in fact, zinc cadmium sulfide. Let me tell you a little bit about cadmium. Years ago, when I worked for another company, when I was on the bench, when I worked in the machine shop, some of the products that we manufactured were plated with cadmium. And they were plated with cadmium because cadmium was an inexpensive way to plate steel so it wouldn't rust. It also color-coded the product because we had some were coated with cadmium, some were black oxided. So a cadmium or silver-colored tool meant it was this type of tool. The black tool was that type of tool. So you could tell the tool, this one's silver, this one's black. This one does this one does that. So it was a quick identifier, okay? Cadmium is toxic. Now, once upon a time, they said, yeah, it's just toxic if you eat it. So don't suck on the tools. Okay, well, that's fine. But you handle the tools, and then you eat a sandwich, or take a drink of water, or touch a machine, and little microscopic pieces get into your bloodstream, through your skin, through the air, okay, through your mouth. And over time, cadmium is a heavy metal. It doesn't go away. So if a little bit here, a little bit there equals a lot. They stopped coating with cadmium because it was toxic. Okay? They started coating with zinc. It's not toxic. And it was the same color. So you still had silver and everybody was happy. But cadmium? No. They stopped coating with it. Again, when I was on the bench, if you were going to cut a thread, okay, one of the things you would do if you were cutting a tough to machine material like we called it Bearcat. That was the trade name. I think it was a 4140 tool steel. If you were cutting a thick, coarse thread, you would take a little bit of white lead on your finger and put it on the part. White lead acted as a lubricant, and the thread turned out really good. Well, you couldn't do that anymore. In fact, what Dopey Me did is when they said, no, we're getting rid of the white lead because it's dangerous, I took a bunch of it and put it in my box. So, okay, they're getting rid of it, but I'm going to keep mine so I can make my threads look good. You put it on your finger, you smear it on the part. Not smart. What did we wash our parts with? 1,1,1 trichloroethylene, okay? If it gets into your kidneys, it'll cause them to stop. All that stuff's been banned, okay? So this is toxic stuff. Now, it's one thing to say, okay, this is a cleaner, this is a chemical, this is a coating, this is whatever. But then, ooh, you know what? This is dangerous. Let's find something else. That's one thing. It's another thing to say, you know what? This might be dangerous, so let's spray it on a bunch of poor people and see how many of them die. That is just evil. And the government isn't even denying this. In fact, a U.S. Senator, Josh Hawley, who's not the best individual, okay? I'm no fan of Josh Hawley, but this is a good thing that he's doing, and hopefully he'll expand it to include the people in Pruitt-Igo. Wow, Josh Hawley and Cori Bush, I agree with something that they both think is a good idea. That may never happen again. But that's how conspiracy theories get started. Sometimes it's just a truth of fact, and it gets expanded. And then sometimes it comes out that the government actually did a heinous act and admitted to it once all the people in charge of doing it are dead. So nobody can be sued. Nobody can be put in prison. Nobody's going to be held accountable because they're all dead, okay? Like when they infected all the black men down in Alabama with syphilis just to see how it would affect them. That didn't come out until the people who did it were dead. Oh, and by the way, a lot of the people that were infected were dead as well. But when this happens, they never admit it until after the fact. And that's how you get conspiracy theories. So, am I a big conspiracy theorist? No, I'm not. I don't believe that the CIA killed Kennedy. I don't believe most conspiracies. I don't think there's three popes, a white pope, a black pope, and a blue pope, okay? I don't believe that the Trilateral Commission and the Rothbergs or Rothsteins, or who are they? Rothschilds, thank you, rule the world. I don't believe any of that. But then before this news came out, if I was told, well, you know what, the government sprayed zinc, cadmium, sulfide all over North St. Louis to see how many people it would kill, I said, you're full of baloney. And it's a thing. So you certainly understand why people believe in conspiracy theories. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And when the fire setters raised their hand and said, yep, we lit that fire, this fire, and that fire, but we didn't light these other three, you have to wonder, don't you? Well, that's it. I'm done. JamesStrongShow@hotmail.com. That's my email address. Send me your email. I will send you a link to the podcast upon publication. You can download it and listen to it at your leisure. That's it. I'm done. Until next time, this is James Strong saying adios.